Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Today, I have a special guest. She was with me last year in season one, as I like to call it, Hannah Mickens, and a good friend of mine. And I'm so excited. She's blessed us before, and I know she's going to bless us again with her knowledge and her wisdom of everything Latin. No, I'm just playing. But welcome, Hannah, to season two. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me again. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, of course. I feel like I always learn. There's a lot of people that I really I think of, and I'm like, I would love to have them on here. And just because I know that I learn, I know that I can grow and learn something new every time. And you're definitely one of those people that I'm like, when Hannah's going to be on, I know that there's going to be some knowledge spit, and so I appreciate it. So no pressure
Yeah, no
to
pressure. You've had some amazing people already who've spit some knowledge. I've been learning from them. So it's kind of fun to be hearing everyone else and like learn from them. You're doing a really good job of getting, I think, a wide range of opinions and voices for
yeah.
sure.
I'm trying. I would love to have some people that maybe differ from my standpoint on maybe some heavy topics. But my circle is my circle. There's not much more. There's not much I can do to get outside of it except for like shoot a DM every now and then to maybe someone I don't know and say, hey, I would love to have you on my show. But that's maybe as I grow and expand, people will feel more comfortable with coming on, even though I don't really know them that well. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
no, that would be awesome.
But you said you learned something new. You even shot me a DM just talking about or a text about one of the guys I had on, Danny Delgado,
Yeah.
and you're like so many little nuggets. And
Yes.
I was so intrigued. I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot. But what were some of the things that you thought were like little gold nuggets?
I know. I'm like, what did I say to you at that time that I thought was like so good? I think the emphasis on literacy and like what
Mm,
it like looks like to live in society and like the way he was promoting literacy and like story and reading and the importance of that. Obviously, I'm a nerd, so I was like here for it 100%. And I think just like the story like many of the stories that he told and just his experience growing up in church and like that consistency that he was talking about of being in the same church with the same pastor and
mm.
that how that like formed him as a person and now as a parent. So yeah, there's a lot of really interesting, I think, things that came from that conversation.
Yeah, and you definitely can relate as far as the just the call that he was making for people to read,
Yeah.
because I know, of course, that you read a lot. You are a well-read person, and so I definitely understand where probably a lot of people, when they hear someone like that say, hey, like we got to figure out how to get people to love reading. And
Mhm.
I had never thought about what he said as far as reading out loud.
Yeah.
And what's funny is someone reached out to me and they were like, I've been reading out loud to someone, and they have exactly what he was saying. They've started reading on their own. And I was like, I think it was just a parent to their child who is, whatever, 14, 15, that kind of like most children nowadays don't really have a whole lot of love for the books. And so that parent was like, hey, we're going to read together. And as that happened, the child started picking up books on their own. And so when they told me that, I was like, man, that's awesome. Like, I didn't even, like, I guess this is something that some people have thought about. I'd never really thought about that.
Yeah, there's a book called The Read Aloud Family, and it's about that how reading aloud is so important just in development as well. Like, our developing our ability to hear and understand complex ideas And usually, you don't have the ability to read above your level, but you can hear above your level, if that makes sense, right? So like maybe a chapter book text would be really difficult, but then you hear it read aloud and you actually comprehend it. And not to divert too far away, but into language studies, but a lot of linguists and people who study language, and my sister Serena could tell you way more than I, but they will say that like comprehensible input, listening and hearing the language, and hearing the language being spoken, hearing the language being read, just that will allow you to then output. So it's interesting that so many people have kind of found these similarities even across disciplines.
Mm. Yeah, and that's super true as far as like I can understand, especially when a language is concerned, because you can read. I mean, you can read the Bible,
Yeah.
and you start reading names, and you just kind of skip over those names because
Right.
you don't know how they're pronounced.
Yeah.
And so I definitely can see where you're coming from as far as when a whole another language is concerned. When if you were just trying to read that like cold turkey, you'd probably be like, I'm just gonna skip over this and probably not pronounce it right in your head, and
Right.
maybe lose a lot as far as it is concerned. But yeah, hearing it read, hearing it how it's pronounced, definitely I'm sure resonates a lot more as far as learning a new language is concerned.
Yeah, it actually gives your brain the tools it needs to make that language mean something, right? So when you're first encountering a new language, it's not going to sound like anything. It doesn't have any meaning to you. And so you need practice for your brain to actually associate those sounds with
Mm-hmm.
something meaningful, and to be able to differentiate between those sounds and what you're used to hearing, right? So when you first hear something, you're in a new language, you might just be like, what is this? It sounds like gibberish to me. The more you hear that, your brain's able to pick up patterns. Your brain is able to recognize intonation, accent, all of those things. So it's building this framework and foundation for how that language sounds. So before you're even outputting, it's actually giving you the tools for just being able to hear and understand that language, so that later when you hear someone else speak it, you're like, oh, that language isn't strange to you. It's not foreign. Your brain actually has a foundation for sound and intonation and all those sorts of things before it even is creating meaning association with those sounds.
How long did it take you to learn a new language?
Well, it's really interesting because my two languages, right, are not necessarily spoken anymore. There is definitely still a vibrant community of Latin language learners who are all about speaking Latin. So I'm not going to say it's not spoken anymore at all. But the process and the methodology for acquiring Latin and ancient Greek is quite different than the process for acquiring a living language. And
Mm-hmm.
now I'm trying to acquire a living language. My sisters are learning Korean and I'm learning Korean with them. And it's quite different than acquiring Latin and Greek. But I will say a large portion of acquisition when it came to Latin and ancient Greek that was difficult was the fact that everyone debates on how it sounded. So there's no like consistency within the scholars and academia. There is some consistency, but it's just like we don't have recordings of the Romans, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we can't really go back and be like, this is how they sounded, this is how they pronounce these things. So really the closest you get is Latin that's been used in the Catholic Church. Ecclesiastical Latin is what it's called. And ecclesiastical pronunciation and variants, because it's used in liturgy, because it's used in a lot of church ritual, has a very different pronunciation than what scholars presume classical Latin sounds like. Same thing with ancient Greek. We have modern Greek, but it's very different as a spoken language than it is as the ancient language that I was learning. So that was definitely a difficulty, but lots of scholars and academics are working on methods to kind of create a bridge between those issues and help students. Like I am a teacher of Latin and we do use comprehensible input methods. I read stories out loud all the time before, and I always be like, don't translate it into English yet, just wait. Let's hear the language. Let's think in this language as much as we possibly can. So there's
Yeah.
definitely tools to that can be used in the classroom setting, even still, to in this method of getting them to hear and understand in the language, because that's what you want. Even when you're reading, most people have a voice in their head. I mean, depends on how advanced you are as a reader, if that voice ever goes away, but you do kind of still hear everything even when you're reading. So it's important to be able to acquire that ability.
So your family just like for fun learns new languages is what you're saying?
Yeah, basically, it's strange that all of us have kind of had different associations with language learning. I learned Latin and ancient Greek for the literature, right? I wanted to read those texts because I felt those texts were important as the English major I was at the time. And I mean, I still was an English major when I graduated, but the literature I thought was important. Serena, on the other hand, she majored in languages specifically. So she majored in Italian and Russian. She learned Swahili for fun.
Oh my gosh.
And then Kashel, my youngest sister, she's got really into the cultural aspects of Korea and also of Japan. So when she was in college, she learned Japanese, then she took up Korean, and my brother knows English. He actually took Latin in college too. And the reason why I took Latin, I'll own it. He said, Hannah, Latin's easier because you don't have to do any speaking. So take it as your language requirement in college. So I did. And then here I am now. So I blame him for that.
You fell in love with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're teaching it.
Yeah, I know.
That's insane.
It is pretty crazy. So you listen to your older brother because you think his wisdom is going to make your life easier. And next thing you know, you're like, yeah, I should double major in this and get my master's in this. It's going to be amazing. Yeah. So
look at you deflecting responsibility.
There I am. I'm blaming my life track on my brother. It's true. Instead of owning the decision that I made.
Now in the classroom, that's definitely, speaking of responsibility, that's definitely something that I definitely try and preach as much as I can.
All day.
To my students, in the sense that, nothing is going to be given to you. Nothing, you don't really deserve anything as far as, what other people have. I kind of just go at them hard because a lot of them are just in this mindset of, I don't have to work that hard, because a lot of them, they see their parents grow up, on welfare, on food stamps and different things. And so they're seeing a lack of work, a lack of effort. And so for me, and they grow up as well hearing the blame game. It's everyone else's fault and different things like that. The world is against me. These people are against me. This race is against me. These, whatever, this group, the men are against patriarchy. All these different things.
Patriarchy, always.
All these different things are against me. And so, without even saying that their opinions are wrong, I just really try and emphasize, hey, if you want to make it, it's on you.
Yes.
And what I'm going to do as your teacher is to equip you, is to try and push you in the right path. But again, it's not my fault. I've said this. I've said, you failing is not my fault. You getting a bad grade is not my fault. You earn it. I'm not giving you
grades. Absolutely, every teacher.
I'm not giving you a grade, and you're earning this grade and different things like that. And how is that for you, though? I'm sure you probably see it even more so, especially at a all boys school. You probably hear all types of excuses from the dudes. I know that's
it's really interesting because I do think there are specifically issues that befall males specifically in education that are different than females. In our society today in general, to generalize, not be too specific, I think there's been an overcompensation for the lack of what females could do in the past to now put a lot of time and energy on empowering women and females in education. And what that does, I think, is swings the pendulum really far towards women and females in the classroom who statistically perform better in the general public school classroom setting, right? Already, I teach all boys. And so in the classroom itself, they're very different than females who would probably just sit still and listen and raise their hand and not be as rambunctious, because they are always rambunctious. And so already, I think the public school system isn't really set up and equipped for giving boys the tools they need to take that personal responsibility for their learning. So they're already starting maybe behind with the concept of learning and education is not for me. It's not something that a male does or does well in. And then specifically, you get into the demographic of the community in which I teach, and there's even more an emphasis not taking, like, being an intellectual, basically, right? It's like every other job is more important or more profitable or more beneficial, even just for like cultural capital, than to be smart. And so I think the stereotypes and also the classroom environment hasn't really been set up for male success in education. And then they get into the classroom and you're telling them, you have to take responsibility for this. And they're like, I don't want to learn. I don't. Like, why should I be in school? Basically is the question that they're asking.
Yeah.
So it's, I guess, a farther like path to be on than just being like, you need to like take personal responsibility for your learning. They don't even really want to
be there
learn in the first place. I think a lot of boys, at least in this present moment. I don't know if that tracks with what you've seen in the classroom either, but
yeah, no, I think it does. Do you think that is pushed on, or maybe the males feel this way because of all the female teachers in the classrooms? I remember when I was first going through, and I don't mean that to be offensive at all, but there is obviously a difference between having a male in the classroom and a female in the classroom. But I remember when I was going through college, the first school I student taught at, the principal came up to me and he's like, do you teach math? And I was like, no, I'm actually history, social studies education. And he's like, there is a need. I mean, he's telling me this. He's like, there is a need for male math teachers and male science teachers. We need them. Yeah. And he's like, I mean, I'm at a high school. And then he went even further and said, and if you ever feel the desire to go to elementary. And he's like, because we need males in elementary. And so I was kind of, obviously the teaching demographic and the teaching ideology is typically more progressive. And so I was kind of shocked to hear, I mean, it wasn't like offensive in any way. I was a little shocked to hear him be so candid about it. But do you think that, as you're getting these kids in middle school and high school, these guys, do you think that that's maybe had an impact, just the lack of, male role models that they've seen inside of the classroom to help them shape a new narrative in the sense that, hey, guys can be in the classroom as well. Guys can also have a love of learning. Guys can also be successful in the teaching realm. Do you think maybe that's part of the reason?
Yeah, I think definitely it goes even outside of like seeing it in the classroom. I think it's seeing it in reality. Like, what do you see out there in the world, and who is set up as a role model for you in your own community, right? Is it the athletes, which is I don't have anything wrong with that, right?
Yeah, no,
But
of
is it
course.
like the athlete? Is it the YouTuber? Is it the rapper? Is it, the hip hop artist? Are those the people that we put on a platform and say, this is who you can become? Or do we show them a multitude of male role models who maybe fit outside of that paradigm? And I think a problem that I have with some progressive education models, specifically in the demographic that I work with, is what's considered like the soft bigotry of low
Oh
expectation,
my, yeah, kills
right?
me, kills me.
Let's get into it, because that's why I feel like so many don't take personal responsibility. It's because there's that soft bigotry of the low expectations. Oh, I don't expect you to be able to do math. I don't expect you to be able to be good at science. I don't expect you to be able to prosper and grow and learn this really difficult language like Latin, right? Like, that's just not historically been the case for your people, for your group of people. So
Or
it's
get
like,
out
it
of
seems
or get
like,
out of your environment.
yeah, like it seems like you're caring, but you're actually creating another barrier. You're creating a barrier of access, of saying, you can't access this education, you can't access this math curriculum, or you can't access this Latin curriculum because of what you look like or where you come from, right? And to me, that is a discrimination and prejudice. And part of, I think, the reason why people have such like low, I guess, expectations is back to the lack of a role model, specifically that men have, that see them aspire towards these things and say, look, I've done these things too. It's acceptable, and it can be celebrated when you do them as well. And with regards to being in the classroom, I would say I always have a little bit of jealousy for the men, because I know they're going to be listened to before I'm going to be listened to, right? Like, they're just more authoritative in the classroom than I am with all those, however many boys are in my room. I can't yell at them, Aaron. It's not going to work. They're not going to
Yeah,
listen
yeah.
to
No,
me.
yeah.
And like, female teachers in the classroom are great for nurturing and for inspiring. And I have to rely a lot more on classroom management systems that work really well than I would when one male teacher comes in and is like, what are y'all doing? Right. And immediately
Yeah.
they shut up. So I definitely think that there is a need for more male teachers in the classroom in general, but I think they need the permission and the ability to teach in a way that is going to reach the males that they have teaching, because most of the system that we're working with in public education is geared towards female success.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely, the soft bigotry of low expectations really is something I try and fight against, in the sense that, again, pushing the dynamic of your future is in your hands,
Yeah.
and I expect you to move forward. Like, one of the, we have bell ringers. I call them journal entries, and I do them every morning at the beginning of every class. Not all teachers, I guess, do it, but I like to do it. Gets the ball rolling, gets these kids thinking. And one of the questions that I've asked last year, but one of the questions that I often kind of focus on is, how are you going to be different when you raise your kids than how your parents raised your kids? And I'll open it up for discussion. Not everyone has to share. I don't pressure everyone to share. But how are you going to be different in the way you raise your kids, or how are you going to be different in the way you work, or how many hours you work? And it allows me to kind of get the ball rolling, as far as you are going to be different. Right. You
Yeah.
are going to change because a lot of these kids, they grow up, and where I'm at is a very poor area. It's rural West Virginia, where there's a lot of poverty, a lack of males, a lack of moms that care, and different things. That's why e-learning, being completely online, is such a failure. I
Yes,
dislike it tremendously.
I agree
Um,
100%.
but it's just like, when you come into my classroom, I expect you guys to already know that you are going to be different.
Right.
Like by the end of when I have you, you're going to know how to create generational wealth because I teach finance. You're going to know
Yes.
how to keep a job and hold a job and maintain a job. You're going to know how to buy a house and pay off your bills and different. You're going to know how to apply for a college loan, and you're going to know subsidized versus unsubsidized. You're going to know the need for a credit score and different things like that, right? Because I am going to put the same expectations that I put on myself on you
Mhm.
guys, and we're not going to settle for anything less than your best. And so, but you see it so much. You are completely correct. We see it so much throughout life, in the sense that, hey, let's extend, you can be on your parents' health insurance until you're 26, and you can be it's okay to live with your parents until you're in your 30s because we want to save money. And I understand there are real issues in this world, especially in bigger cities, as far as rent is concerned and different
Right.
things like that. But there is a, hey, it's okay if you're not being successful. It takes time, or not even success, that's just relative. But if you it takes you a little bit longer, your mental health and different things like that. And we really just put the standard and the expectations just so low, and
Yeah.
people in our generation, they continue to just, oh, you're right, I'll party until I'm 30, and I'll
Yeah.
just, it's okay for me to drink every night, and go out on the weekends even though I have 3 kids, and society says it's okay. And so as teachers, we're like, people that recognize it, we're fighting against this. We're fighting
Yeah.
against it. So
Yeah, I would agree. Like in the classroom, right, we're trying to instill the sense of take ownership, take accountability, personal
mhm.
responsibility, not just for your learning, but also for what you do, right? You have to manage your own behavior because we live in a community, we live in a society. What you do infects everyone else in the classroom. That's what we're trying to say. And then we go out perfectly like you described. The society that we live in, though, is promoting the exact opposite of those ideals. And so you're
Mhm.
getting two different messages. And one of the ways of talking about this is the concept of extended adolescence.
Mhm.
The idea that this generation has moved when it comes to even development, which is pretty crazy, like development in the brain, from what they consider adolescence and not being able to move on and take personal responsibility for things in your life, like you're talking about, having kids already, but still living like you're in your teens, right? Like complaining about adult life. There's a whole group of people who complain about adult life. And it's funny at first, like, oh,
Yeah,
adulting.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh, this all these memes about adulting. But it's like, when are you gonna decide that you're an adult? Like, even for me, I had to come to the reckoning, more like it was a reckoning of like you are grown,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
There's no real liminal moment in our society anymore where we look at everyone, look at people and say, you're grown now. You can't be behaving that way anymore. You do need to figure out how to pay your taxes. You do need to move out and get a job. You do need to develop a work ethic, right? This is why we have so many people who can't hold down a job, is because they're still acting like they're 16 and they only need to work over the summer, right? They have no ability to manage time and to have consistency and routine and discipline. It's all about just, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to live my life and I'm going to keep living my life. And it's like, when do we say, like, you need to grow up and be an adult? And when the messaging from the media and from society at large is that you can continue into adolescence forever, it's no surprise that the the children we're working with in the classroom also have that idea.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, it's like you're fighting against so many things. You're fighting against social media, and you're fighting against the mainstream media, where everything in the news is just every single other person's fault. It's like we've seen it more now than ever, especially not to get into the political spectrum too much, but as far as Trump was concerned, I mean, everything was Trump's fault. He could have walked on water and they would have been like, oh, he can't swim.
Yeah.
But I mean, and with Biden, the media has now, with withdrawing troops. Again, not to get into it, withdrawing troops from Afghanistan and everything that has unfolded in that regard, it's now Biden has blamed it on Trump. Biden has blamed it on his military people. I mean, there is no acceptance of, I mean, he literally has said, the buck stops with me, and then has gone on in the same sentence to blame every single other person under the sun. Um, and so you get these kids in the classroom where they're hearing that, they're hearing it from their parents, where their parents didn't love them, and their parents did this and that, and so now that's being pushed on to our students. And so you're really fighting against the grain. I mean, you're pushing a rock uphill as far as getting these students to understand that there's nothing that I can say that can change your living environment. There's nothing I can say that can change certain societal issues. But what I can try and instill in you is that you have the chance to be better. You
Yeah.
have the chance to make a difference. You have the chance. There's so much more for you in your life, even if you don't see it. There's so much more that can be done, that can be said. But then they go home and, and they see their parents exactly where they left them at 8 in the morning, still sitting there on the couch, accepting that disability or whatever it might be. And that's not a knock on obviously that's not everyone that I teach, and that's not everywhere in this area that I teach, but it's everywhere in the United States.
And I think part of that I would even push, and I know your libertarian sensibilities and my own might disagree with this, but I think part of the reason why is because we live in such a hyper individualistic society. Because when you live in such a hyper individualistic society, it becomes all about me, whatever I want to do, right? It's all about the I. And
Yeah.
so as long as I'm happy, as long as I'm living my best life, hedonism, right? I'm just pursuing pleasure and desire, as long as it's all about me, right? I don't want to work. So capitalism is the problem. Capitalism. It's because I don't want to work. Work is hard. Blame capitalism, right? Like, or I don't want to have to better myself and grow as a person and work out my own shadow side that's causing me to not be treated well in society, but it's everyone else's fault. It's men's fault, okay? That like
the patriarchy,
right? Or all of these things, we find someone to blame because we don't want to take ownership of ourselves, because we want to do what we want to do. And when we and that's, I think, the emphasis of too much freedom. It's like excessive freedom. We have so much freedom to live how we want that we no longer consider that we live in a society. And that's why people have a problem with authority, and people have a problem with roles, and people have a problem with personal responsibility, because that means that you have a duty, right? I'm really interested in the concept of duty right now, because it's like there are duties we all have as human beings, and even as believers, as Christians, to God, to our nation, to our community. And part of that duty is to be a good citizen. But to be a good citizen, you're not going to be able to do whatever you want to do. That means you're going to have to limit, self-manage, right? and take some ownership of yourself, you're going to have to limit your freedom. And that's a big issue people have. Like, they want the freedom to go out and party all night and sleep with whomever they want and not have to suffer the consequences of that, even if that is having a child, right? That's infringing on their freedom to live however they want. And I think that's one of the major things that has kind of, I'm not against personal liberty,
No, of
absolutely
course, of
not.
course.
But I think there needs to be that balance where now we feel like we don't owe anything to anybody else. Of course, everyone, doesn't want others to infringe on their rights, right?
Yeah.
How dare anyone else infringe on mine? Like, no one's going to tolerate that. But then they want everyone to be okay with their infringement, doing whatever they want, no matter if it harms the community or the society.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree with thinking about others. Obviously, as a Christian in the spiritual sense, we love others, you love people, you love God, you love people in the spiritual realm. As far as like the community is concerned, I think that's where and I was gonna ask you where things have changed or where you think things might have changed, because you look at obviously everything's about war right now in Afghanistan, so it got me thinking about World War I, World War II, and World War II. These men are called the greatest generation. And definitely we were more free back then as far as the government was concerned, a lot more limited government, even though that was in the process of changing with FDR. But, you had this common goal. You had this, is all these individual men making this choice, right, to fight for a common goal. And I think that's where I become, and that's where I can justify, being a libertarian even as a Christian, in the sense that even though a libertarian might say, it is your I'm all about individualism for sure.
Yeah.
But as a Christian and as a libertarian, I'm like, if each person makes their individual choice, you better the society, right? You better the community. It's not just one or two people, but it's every single person acting in one accord. But again, I might be just mixing my religious faith and my governmental stances as well, but I try and keep them separate.
I think it's also right, as a libertarian, maybe libertarians might say that the best government, it's impossible, would be anarchy, right? The rule of man, right? That's what anarchy means, like the rule of man. But I think for there to be the rule of men in general, I mean humanity.
Well, I don't necessarily with the anarchy.
You're not for anarchy. Most libertarians, I would say, they're like, ideally the rule of, well, that men need to be able to rule in the sense where, like, there's no power structure.
No, I definitely agree with the power structure, but I think there's a definite role for of government. I guess you could say, as well, as a classical liberal, that might be what you would maybe fall under as well. I'm not sure, but I definitely think the government's there to protect you against itself, really, right? It's to protect your rights, your life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and it's not to infringe on any of those rights. So I definitely think there's a role for the government, but I think it's definitely gotten out of hand.
But what I was going to say is that even for there to be, no, you're good, for there to be any kind of rule, like, of men, of humanity, then humanity needs to rule themselves, right? Like, we have to manage ourselves. For us to be able to manage a society, we have to manage ourselves, meaning you have to limit yourself. You have to know your own boundaries. You have to know your limitations, and you have to deny yourself some things that you want. And I think that's where I was pointing to, like, this hyper individualism has gone to the extreme, is that now no one has the ability to limit their own desires for the desires of the greater good. And I think that's what you're pointing out too in your reflection back to World War II and the greatest generation, right? They said, okay, maybe what is the greater good that I have to then like limit my own desire, my own choices. I have to sacrifice something for our nation. I don't think a lot of people even would say that they have a duty to our nation.
Yeah. And so let me stay on that. So where do you think that's changed? Where do you think, I mean, obviously we're 70 years or 60 years between there from that. But so I mean, obviously there's what I'm saying is there's a lot I'm sure that could be said, but maybe we could center on what do you think has changed in that regard, where people that live here in the States have such a just a disdain for the United States. They have such a disdain for America, and it truly is mind-boggling how disgusted they are with the place that has presented so much and has given so much. And if you were to ask someone, 70 years from now, or I don't know. I wasn't alive in the 80s or 70s, but I'm sure even back then, how do you feel about the United States? You would definitely get a very different answer than you would today. So where do you think maybe where we've gone wrong?
I think there's a where do
I
we
know
begin? Where
the
to
education
start?
system for sure. I
I
guess
would
I would probably.
definitely, sorry, what?
Oh, I said for sure, probably the education system.
Yeah, I would definitely start with education. I think there's a lack of understanding our history accurately. There is also a group of people who I think have genuine issues with the way history has been presented in the past. Maybe they feel like it was presented more in a sense that it wasn't congruent with reality, right? That we maybe have made light of the places where we were wrong and we did terrible, horrible things.
But what
And
nation?
so,
I don't disagree with that.
yeah,
But
and I
what
know,
just comes to mind? What nation doesn't do that?
right, exactly. We both understand that when you teach history fully and rightly, like you can still have, I think, a strong patriotic sense for America. I think another place that we've gone wrong is like just media consumption and excess.
Yeah.
We just we just consume, and we don't create anything really of value anymore. And so it's hard to find anything valuable when you're living in your alternative reality of self. I think also a lack of feeling like there's belonging and connection with others, right? Like why did the nation even be founded? Me and my parents, they were just here to visit me. We spent 5 hours in the Museum of the American Revolution reading and learning, and it was amazing.
Where's that at?
It's in Philadelphia.
Is it okay?
Yeah, it's in Philadelphia. So anyone come visit me and I'll take you there. It's going to be awesome. But one thing that was really cool that they had George Washington's tent from Valley Forge.
Wow.
You can see it. There's incredible history around that tent, which is so interesting. But to look at, okay, what really founded our nation in every single sense of the word, all of the ugly and the gore and all of that, and to look at it, there is a lot of these ideals that at the moment they were written, they were hypocritical, right? Ideals of freedom when you have enslaved peoples, that's hypocrisy. But there was this concept of like, we should be united around liberty for everybody, not just for me. And so we become so consumed with, I want my freedom, when we don't realize like, what does it mean to have freedom for all? Right. Yeah. And for our posterity. I definitely think we've lost the link of like, not just freedom for me, but freedom for my posterity. What does it mean to think about the next generation? And if I'm building a society that's going to be beneficial for my next generation, and you can't think about the next generation when you feel isolated from the generation before you, and you have no touch with what they've gone through to give you the life that you have now, right? We're just living in our individualistic silos with no touchstones from the past or to the future. And I think that's a detriment. There's this poem, because I love poetry and I think it's amazing, but Maya Angelou, she wrote this poem. It was actually the poem that she gave for Bill Clinton's inauguration. So sad that it was at that moment, but It's a beautiful poem. And one thing she says in that is history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Lift up your eyes upon this day breaking for you, give birth again to the dream. And then she goes on, and at the end of it, she says, here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face, your country, and say simply, very simply, with hope, good morning. And so I think a lot of our society is trapped in the part of history that cannot be unlived. Right? We're trying to make people feel guilty and trying to undo the horrible things that happened in history, slavery, the atrocities against Native Americans, right? And we're over here and we're putting all of this on the former generations. We're trying to unlive history, but it's like we can't.
Yeah.
We can't unlive history. We just need to face what we have in front of us and move forward with courage. And I love the way that she ends that poem, because it's like, you need to look at your brother and look at your sister. And that's what creates our country. I feel like people don't look at each other, truly look at each other and say, you are a human who lives here in this nation. And what is my duty to you as a fellow citizen?
I love that. When you were talking about the founding fathers and what they were writing as, they're talking, the greatest document to ever be written, outside of course, the Bible. But when you were saying that, what came to mind was, and I might lose some people here, but isn't that such a God thing for man to write something that they can't fully understand and they don't fully put into practice, in the sense that freedom for all, right? We're endowed by our Creator. Yeah. And yet there is a disconnect between the words that they're writing. And I get it. Thomas Jefferson, was trying to end the transatlantic slave trade. I get that. And he had that in the original. But there is that disconnect. And I get, not every founding father, I might have some people yelling at me right now. I get not every founding father was, awful to their slaves, and they definitely treated them. A lot of our founding fathers were Christians. And so, but there is, that disconnect of, okay, we want freedom. Yeah. And so that's, for me, it's just hitting me. It's like, that's such a God thing, for him to reveal something that we don't fully understand. We're not even fully putting into practice. And yet we're saying, no matter, we're going to still write this down. And so that might be, again, I might lose people, but that might be where we've lost our disconnect as well, in the sense that we don't even believe, that where our rights are coming from.
Yeah, I think the entire course, I mean, not to summarize all of American history in one sentence.
Oh, no, do it. One sentence.
But
go ahead.
I'd say the entire course of American history is trying to bridge the incongruence between what was stated in our founding documents and what existed in reality. Right. And every single amazing civil rights leader that you look at,
Frederick Douglass, man.
Yeah, Frederick Douglass. He was said. I don't know how many people have read Frederick Douglass's defense of the Constitution against slave owners, but he was like, no, slavery is not advocated for in the Constitution, because if so, then the South can secede with no problem. And he was like, no, our founding documents did not support Constitution. And I think everyone should read that. It's amazing, and it will open your eyes. And even Martin Luther King Jr., right? When he's the March on Washington, he's quoting the Constitution, and he's saying, the Declaration of Independence, and he's saying, look, there is incongruence here. This is what was promised to me. This is what I have not seen in my reality. Let me see what has been promised to me and to my future generations. And now everyone has sight and this really deep-seated anger against these things. Whereas in the past, everyone was like, we are pursuing this ideal. It's an ideal for a reason, which means it's not yet seen in reality. But I think we have continued to pursue that ideal. Just like, I'm so big on education and reading and knowing history, because
Yeah.
once you do, you'll begin to see like, oh, wow, I have it so good. If you also in Philadelphia would like to come see the Liberty Bell, and you see how this symbol was first used as a symbol during the American Revolution, and then it was used as a symbol of freedom during abolitionists used it as a symbol. The Civil War used it. It was symbolic. It meant something. Like, it meant freedom. And you know what's inscribed on there? There's a verse from Leviticus it's inscribed on there. It's talking about freedom. So I totally agree with you about the concept, and these ideas come from scripture. But I think in even women, right? When we were like, let us vote, please, that'd be great. That was a symbol. And now people are like, oh, that's like, I don't care about history. That's America is founded on blood and all these things.
Yeah.
Two things can be true at the same time. Like, we can acknowledge the history can't be unlived. We can acknowledge the history and terrible things we did. We can also look at the future and say, how can we get to these ideals of freedom? But part of creating that free and just society means I need to be able to first rule myself and be able to live a life that's not going to inhibit, right, someone else's freedom.
Yeah.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah. And what you were saying, Jordan Peterson, he says 12 rules for life is number one, you got to make your bed. You got to make your own bed. And then you can start to work on society. So you definitely have to take care of yourself first. But I think there's also, let me ask you, do you think there's a faux outrage in the sense that it's just ginned up out of thin air, in the sense that, we have, this whole new feminist movement, and women are the highest voting percentage. They outvote men. I don't know the exact numbers, but women are out there speaking their mind. We have women in Congress. We have women all over the place in seats of authority, and yet there is still this cry from this new feminist a movement of persecution, of we are still under this patriarchy. Now, do you think there's still things that we can work towards, or do you think it's just ginned up out of thin air, or do you think there's a leg to stand on for some of these claims?
Yeah, I think that there are definitely still parts of society, even maybe in the US, where women see their rights inhibited, but I wouldn't say it's the ones that feminists.
Yeah.
Right. I am obviously a woman, pro women, and I think there needs to be a big distinction that we've lost in society on what that means. You cannot be for women's rights and then also believe there's no distinction between men and women.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
I don't want to even get into that, but I'm just saying
I hear you.
right
No,
now.
I understand that.
You can't, right? And so a place where women still see a lot of issues would be in sexual harassment in the workplace, might be one, right? Or even sexual assault and those types of situations that occur because women generally are, this is true biologically, weaker than men in like their physical bodies.
Yeah,
so
more vulnerable.
More likely to be attacked and to undergo sexual assault. And usually the justice for these crimes isn't given. And so if we're a protected class in that sense, then we need to know and be strong about why we are protected in that sense. We can't be creating this this one role on the other end of like women, sexual assault, those types of situations. Also, women, that's an undefined thing that we can't truly know what they are. So it's like, how can you protect me from this and be a protected class? And then on this side, be saying, being a woman, there's nothing special or specific. that comes from being a woman. I definitely think, having more holistic policies in the workplace that women can want to be mothers. I think that's a thing that's actually been the swing of the pendulum too far when it comes to feminism, is now this consistent idea that women need to be in competition with men, and to be equal means you need to be just like a man, right? And that's clearly, I don't think that's true. And I think that when it comes to fighting for women's rights, we need to say what is unique and specific around women. To me, that is being able to have children and being a mother. And so, what are we doing in society to support women who have to, for a lot of reasons, be in the workplace, but also still want to have children? Can we create, maternal policies in companies and businesses so that women can have more time off and to be with their families? How do we have a more pro-family society? I'd say that's one thing too. How do we create places and workspaces for women who maybe want to bring their kids into the workspace? Or I know at UNM, there was rooms for women professors where they could breastfeed their children. To me, that's awesome. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about women's rights and moving forward. But we've gone so far to the other side where we don't even talk about what does it mean to be a woman in a special and unique way, and how do we protect these things and give women their rights, actual women, right? And I think that's where the lie of the birth control and abortion is just so huge to me. It's thinking about the patriarchy, right? And I don't mean to get on this rant about the patriarchy, but it boggles my mind that people would blame the patriarchy for everything and then not consider that it was men who voted for Roe versus Wade. Men, right? That's an example of the patriarchy. The patriarchy is men not taking responsibility for what they have done to play in the part of conception, right? It takes two to tango. That a baby doesn't just happen. And it's you really want to talk about, the patriarchy, but you are unwilling to call out men in this area who are supporting abortion, right? Or not giving them the ability to have this opinion on this issue. I saw, because of all this stuff going down in Texas, if you're against abortion, just have a vasectomy, is some meme that's going around. And I was first off, so one, you're saying that men do play a role in this issue. Two, you do understand that this is a human being that's created, right? You're believing this lie because why? You want to do what you want to do. So don't pin it on the patriarchy. Say it's the patriarchy. Say, you know what? I want the same access of shirking personal responsibility that our law system has given to men, which it, has, especially when it comes to child support and things like that. Statistically, men more than likely do not, I would say, do their fair share when it comes to taking care of their offspring. And so women might feel it's not fair. Men get away with it. So now you want to do the same thing then. You also literally want to get away with murder. And that's what I think most people in society are looking at. They're saying, I want that same amount of freedom to shirk responsibility that I believe men have. And so I'm here for abortion. And I don't know if that was too harsh.
No, you're fine. No,
I do think that it comes from a real place. I think that there is, the course of human relationship and living in a society, people get hurt, people go through trauma, things happen. And so this distrust and this frustration, I think that women have with men, I don't think it's always seated in just outrage. To answer that question, I don't think it's always seated in outrage. But I think it's also part of it is you not willing to look at yourself in the mirror and say, like we've been talking about, I can't control what other people do, but I can control myself. And it's has it become just this competition? Do you think that what it means for women to be equal is to be just like men? Because if so, then you're always going to be chasing this power that you'll never have because you can't become a man no matter how hard you try.
Yeah, and I think there's a desire, maybe unknowingly, by a lot of these people maybe that fall on the left side of the aisle or progressive side of the aisle. I'm sure on the right is maybe not this. It's just not all about equality, but I see it as you don't want equality. You want privilege.
Mm.
You
Yes,
want more than equality.
yes.
Because equality would say, okay, I'm okay with everything that you just said about a man. He should uh, uh, be there until birth. He should stick around. You want to make these arguments? Then okay, let's make the arguments. If you think men are getting away with, impregnating women and then dipping out and no one's saying anything about them, then okay, let's talk about that. Let's
Yes.
say that they should stay around. Let's say that they should be around to raise a child and have equal responsibility. But the argument really isn't even about that. It's about you wanting the ability not to be equal, not to be treated the same as a man, but
Mm.
to have the choice to have an abortion. You want more than just equality. You don't want to be treated as in that job interview as okay, man and woman, same credentials, we should be treated the same. A lot of people, and what I'm seeing, is no, because I'm a woman, that's what I should get. Because of this, I should get. That's not equality. That's you're asking for more than that, and I think
Or you have to have the claim that equals that then there is no, then you're different, right?
yeah, yeah,
If you can use because I'm a woman as a reason, then it has to be that there's a difference
yeah,
between men and women, and men and women are different and deserve or maybe
and
should
that's
be
okay.
treated
Yeah,
with different, processes. That's what I
yeah,
always think about when it comes to concepts of like sexual assault and rape and things like that. Like it's more likely to happen towards women, and we have to
of
be
course,
honest and
yeah.
say that if we're pushing for this myth of equality with men, and then also at the same time claiming we need to be a protected class, like then there's a difference.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely in the. I mean, we could go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, but just on the politically correct side of the aisle, it's like we got to be careful in just saying that men and women are different in the sense, and it's like that's okay.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Even just
That's a beautiful thing.
yeah,
I've told all of my students, all of my girl students, because I have 5 sisters, and so
yeah,
I'm very a big advocate as far as like my syllabus day. I just lay it out there about I don't want to hear any inappropriate jokes. Like
no,
I look the dudes in the eyes, and and I try and really be a male role model, not only for the guys but also for the girls as well, for them to see, okay, this is how a man should be treating me, this is how a man should be viewing me, and this is how a man should be protecting me against other men who want to try and say inappropriate things about me or to me or whatever it might be. um but but I've told them all this. I'm like, giving birth is a superpower. You are
right,
a hero. You
right,
to be able to produce a new life, to be able to produce a whole new being is an amazing gift. And I don't even say from God, but it obviously is from
yeah,
God between
yeah,
when I'm talking to you. And so but it's like you can't even say that
and
because no one can define what is a woman on the left side of the aisle. You can't say
yeah,
what is woman. And then
yeah,
Jen Psaki, who says, a reporter, I think it was, or it wasn't Ducey, but a reporter says, about the abortion. He asked her a
yeah,
question about Joe Biden being a Catholic and supporting abortion, which is a whole nother thing. It's so contradictory. He's
right,
gotten kicked. I mean, he can't even take communion at a lot of Catholic churches because
right,
of it. But she has the audacity to say, well, I know you can't give birth. Such a condescending, just jerk thing to say. I mean, he's asking a question as a reporter, and she says, well, you can't give birth. Well, I thought men could give birth.
right,
That's what you were
right,
saying like 10 minutes ago. But there is no there's no follow through. It's just a lot of contradictory statements, a lot of contradictory beliefs,
Yeah.
and it's like,
And to me, that is the most disappointing thing that we see in this
yeah,
new wave of feminism, right? Because I'm for women advancement. Like we see what's going on in Afghanistan right now and what women are going to have to undergo. And we all can now look at our society and be like, we have a society where women can thrive,
yeah,
right? We know what it looks like to have a society where women can thrive.
more women are
So
in college.
yeah, like we have a society where we can see, and there's always like, what more can we do? But part of looking at society and saying how can women thrive is to be able to say what makes women unique, and how can we as a
Yeah,
class like look at them and say how can we make sure they survive. Same thing with males, because we are different. And I think to me that's the biggest lie that we've believed as a society, is that we've allowed the one of the most sacred things that women can do, which is to be a mother.
mm,
We've put that aside. We've literally, some people have literally neutered that. We like, our society does not support that at all whatsoever. We see with this pro-abortion crowd that like the one thing that is sacred and unique to us is the thing that's just been like thrown out the window and like
mm,
just constantly like taking a hit. And
yeah,
it's like, to me, it's like laughable. You're gonna let a guy, talking about the patriarchy, you're gonna let a guy, because you're like anti the patriarchy, but you're gonna let a guy determine whether or not you're going to be a mother,
mm,
right? Like, it's
yeah.
crazy. It's crazy.
It's crazy. So where do you think that we can change? I'll start wrapping this up. We've already been
Yeah.
talking for over an hour. Where do you think our society can change? What do you think that we can do as just individuals? That's why I love just talking to everyday people. Um, I love just hearing everyone's perspectives. But so as just everyday people going about life, how can we make a difference? How can we change? How can we, maybe speak to people of women, men about abortion? How can we speak to them about taking responsibility? How can we speak to them about growing and developing and becoming an adult, and accepting who they are quicker, sooner than just, until they reach the age of 40, and the importance of living in a fair society, and
Yeah.
a community that has one goal and is, the same goal oriented community. So maybe that's a loaded question, but
Right.
what do you think maybe we could do different?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of hope. I don't want to be this like Debbie
Yeah, no,
Downer
of
person.
course.
I have so much hope. I think it just starts with you, and when you taking that personal
Yeah,
responsibility and really like recognizing, especially as Christians and believers, that how much access we have to be a light to other people. I'd say education to me is one of the biggest, right? If I think we like to think that everyone is logical and reasonable and looks at the facts, when in reality,
yeah, yeah,
a compelling narrative, a compelling story, a poem, a movie, a film, like art, all these things could probably move people in more profoundly than, a list of statistics, because that's not hitting at the like, it's not hitting at people's emotions. It's really hard to persuade when you're just like a stone-faced person who spouts out, statistics and facts. So I think engaging in good stories that show, that
mm,
actually are living examples of the ideals that we're talking about, right? And this is Christianity in a nutshell, is that it's the like actual proof of when we follow Christ and submit to him, like we live in a society that is full of human flourishing and for the benefit of all. And I think just having conversations, that's what you can do, is read, be well read, understand good stories, understand people's point of view, and then just be able to approach them with compassion and see the reason behind why they think what they do, and really engage. I think
yeah,
so many of us, because we are in our silos now, we're not really engaging. And when we are engaging, we're engaging with anger. But there's so many things you can do outside of the internet. I would caution everyone to
yeah,
like
yeah,
get off the internet and get off the yelling and talk to everyone in your day-to-day life. Find a place where you can make a difference, even if that conversation, like there's one of the most interesting, moving, compelling poems I read. It's called The Mother by Gwendolyn Brooks, and it's about abortion. And I like recommend this poem to everyone to read, especially women, because she's not like this pro-life figure. She's like this Black women writer, and she's wrestling with the reality of it, right? So even having access points and tools and things ready to go where you can engage with someone and say like, hey, would you mind like reading this poem with me and thinking this through? Like, what did you think about the way that she wrote about abortion, coming from a perspective that's not rife with political outrage, right? Like the earnest things. And I think also just living a quiet life. Oftentimes that's what scripture tells us to do, but we don't want to do it. But what I mean by that is, think about the things that are noble, that are just, that are pure, that are lovely, that are of good report. What are you consuming in your day-to-day life? Like, are you on social media constantly consuming outrage? You're going to output that outrage. Are you reading the word? Are you in scripture? Like, that's going to be what's going to pour out of you. We become what we behold. What are you beholding? And after that, that's when you take that stock of yourself, I think that's when you begin to make a difference with those in your day-to-day life. Like, we all want to make a difference, but I think we want to make a difference in this grand way. When in reality, you can really only impact those around you. So it's like, are you living a life that's going to make a difference in the lives around you? That's, I think, how you make a difference. Of course, obviously, monetarily, you can always be giving to things that you support. There's so many amazing organizations that you can always be giving money to. You can always be volunteering your time in, with organizations, with groups, for whatever floats your boat. There's so many social issues to advocate for. And then to answer your question about how can we engage specifically women in these conversations and like speak to their heart, I think a lot of times I would just encourage those who are mothers and even those who aren't to live in that reality of what it means to be a woman, to not give place to all the lies and all the nonsense that the world, the media tries to push on you, and to just like, actually that life is an example in and of itself. I think we need to hear the better stories. We need to hear the success stories. We need to hear the stories of the people who have just, raised the kids, had the babies, who've done it and who've sacrificed. We need to hear the stories of the adults who've actually made it, who are building the generational wealth. We need to engage in those histories of the people we know around us so that we can see, okay, this is a good life. I can live this good life. And when I do, then I'm being a good citizen to all those around me. I don't know if I gave actual practical action points, but
no, it's great. I think that's a great way to end, and it's a beautiful way to end. Read more poetry, everyone.
Absolutely.
Read more.
Abby, if you want a list, I always have poems for everyone to read.
People can get a list from you?
Oh, absolutely. They can get a list from
where can they find where can they contact you?
You can find me on Instagram, Fantastic12. Follow me, hit me up. You could also email me, hanjmick@live.com, if you want some recommendations and resources.
Love it. Any books off the top? Just I know that's probably another loaded question for you. What's one book that you would recommend?
One book I would recommend to all believers is Brett McCracken's The Wisdom Pyramid. It's about how we spend our time, our consumption of media in this day and age, and how it's forming us into malnourished citizens. I would also recommend On Reading Well by Karen Swallow Prior. It's just on same thing, like what is the content and the quality of what we're consuming. And when we read well, it forms us, and it, even helps us consider virtue and vice. And so those are two books that I'd consider. I'd also consider reading T.S. Eliot's The Four Quartets if you want to dive deep into some poetry, that's kind of where I would start.
Love it. I love it. Thank you, Hannah. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your heart, sharing
Thanks
some
for having
things,
me.
giving some good insight, things to soak up and chew on, and I appreciate you. We're gonna have to do this again.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Thanks, everyone.